Today I'm going to do a step-by-step demo on how I painted this angry cat spirit figure here. So here's the cast resin figure. After I popped it out of the silicone mold, I cleaned it up a bit, I sanded it, and now it is ready to paint. I'm going to start with a wash over the entire piece with this Payne's Gray, and I'm using a medium-sized filbert brush. So a wash just means I'm adding a little bit of water to it. So it's going to be a very wet application, and this will allow me to take a rag and pat it down afterwards, and that'll remove some of the paint from the surface, but it'll kind of leave paint into the areas where the rag doesn't hit, kind of the recessed areas and all the little crevices, which will really kind of accentuate the shadow and the form. I really make sure to stab my brush into all the little details, which is pretty easy to do because it's so wet. And I'm continuously running my brush around the entire piece just to re-wet it. I don't want it to dry in any spots. That way when I go back to pat it dry with a cloth, it's kind of uniformly wet, so I'll get kind of a uniform pattern. So after it's completely covered and wet, I lay it backside down on a cloth, and then I fold the cloth over and start patting. I try to be a little bit more careful with the face when I do this. The face I have a very specific look for. I want it to look clean, as opposed to the body where I kind of just pat randomly because I actually want it to have kind of like random spotty texture. So I do end up going back to the face and patting a little bit more lightly and a little bit more gently to kind of control the look a little bit more. So this first wash was actually a little bit too light for me, so I'm just going to do the exact same thing while it's wet and put another second wash on top of it and actually just add a little bit less water. It's actually one of the very versatile things about washes. You can do a super light wash, you can do a heavier, darker wash, or you can do a variety of washes with different colors on top of each other. I'm also going to give the little mouse staff the same wash while I have all the colors out. So here's what the cat looks like after it's dried. You can see that I definitely want to pick up the color in the recessed areas for the nose and the mouth and the eyes, and also a little bit on the edges of this teardrop shape, definitely around this ring around the face. It also picked up these nice shadows underneath the arms because I wasn't really able to dab the cloth in there as easy. And then it has all this kind of nice splotchy texture, which will look really nice after I dry brush on top of it. It'll just give it a little bit of texture. And it also left some shadow on the kind of inside of this little ring that circles the face. The underside I'm not really going to worry about too much because this is all going to be painted a Mars black. So the first coat on the face is just with a titanium white, and again I'm using a kind of medium-sized filbert brush. So with dry brushing, I'm just putting a very little amount of paint onto a dry brush. And then I'm even wiping it off on the palette paper and my gloves, so there's just the littlest amount of paint there. Then I'm just quickly but lightly dusting the face with the brush. So I'm really just hitting the top of the surface here. And what this does is it really just kind of highlights the texture, and it also lets you see the base washes underneath. I like to get this layer out of the way first because I know that I will get some white paint on the body with these wide brush strokes, so I can always go back later with the body paint and cover up the white. So I'm going to be using a brilliant purple for the first layer of dry brushing on the body, and I'm using this filbert brush. I have a handful of brushes that are a little beat up. They've been used a lot, so the bristles are kind of spread out and ragged. And I really like using these brushes sometimes on the dry brushing because when you do this, you get all these kind of like crosshatch marks and lines and scratchy looking texture, which I think can look really kind of cool and organic. So this is the same dry brushing technique as the face. I'm just going a little bit heavier with the paint just because I want the color to pop out a little bit more. And I also want the brush texture to be a little bit heavier. And I like how this crosshatch texture kind of contrasts the texture of the wash, which is a little bit more blotchy. So basically I'm just laying two different colors and two different textures on top of each other. I'm also purposely trying to avoid the areas that would have natural shadows, like under the arms. And this is just to really make sure that those shadows underneath are visible. Then I come in with a little smaller brush to kind of pick up this area where I have to be a little bit more careful. Sometimes the big brush gets a little out of control. I don't want to hit the face, so I got to come in and kind of finesse this area a little bit. And then finally I come in with this super little brush so I can just hit the edges here. So here it is after the purple has dried, and you could see the brush strokes. You could see the little texture that's left from that brush. One of the reasons I really like this is because it kind of, two reasons really. One, it makes it look kind of like a fabric, and two, because it's not totally opaque, it picks up the wash that was underneath it, so you get these darks that kind of pop up underneath the arms, right in this little kind of crevice here, right around the ears. So it just adds a little bit of color variation, a little bit of depth, and also some nice texture. For the face, I'm using a titanium white and a Mars black. And I'm using a stippling technique where I stab the brush over and over again and just kind of build up layers of black and white dots. And this kind of gives a kind of fur texture. And I'm using another one of those brushes that's a little beat up. It just makes it easier to get kind of that dot pattern because all of the bristles are frayed. And just like the dry brushing, there's very little paint on. So I start with one kind of uniform layer of black dots, and then I come on top of that with gray. I use the same brush, dip it in a little bit of white, mix it up a bit, and kind of stab a layer of gray dots. You can also see that I'm constantly kind of wiping a little excess paint off on my glove. And then it's really just a process of building up layers of black and white and gray until I get a color and a pattern that I'm happy with. I actually feel like on this piece I kind of overworked the face a little bit. I kept adding more and more layers of dots because I wasn't getting the exact kind of color or pattern I was looking for. But sometimes it's a little tricky to get a pattern that's consistent. But what I really like about this technique is that with the stippling on the face, it really kind of separates the face from the body because of the different textures. One thing I'm doing by wiping the brush on the latex glove is kind of removing any like weird excessive paint deposits on the brush, and it just evens the paint on the brush out a little bit. So that kind of helps with the consistency of the dot pattern. Then I come in with a smaller brush and I highlight the inside of that little teardrop shape. This is just going to help separate the eyes from the face. And then I also add a little white to the kind of nose and cheek and mouth area, just to kind of highlight the snout, or I don't know, whatever cats have. And then the last thing I do is get a little bit of pink and just kind of make a little triangle for the nose there. And then just a little bit of cleanup along the edge of the cowl where the stippling made a little bit of a mess. The next layer is a bright iridescent gold dry brushed over the entire body. I'm using a large filbert brush, and except for the face, I'm just dusting the entire thing with gold. After I get a nice layer with the larger brush, I'll come in with smaller brushes and kind of hit some of the smaller detail, especially around the face where I want to make sure I don't get any gold on the face. And then I always pick a few spots to kind of highlight with a little bit more gold. On this piece, I'm adding a little bit more gold to the tips of the ears and also to the ends of the arms and hands. I like how this effect kind of separates different body parts. It almost looks like the cat is wearing kind of gold gloves. And then I'll put a little bit of extra gold on the bottom edge of the robe, and then a little extra highlight right around that ring that goes around the face. I like how this just kind of highlights these two round circles and helps to define the different shapes on the piece. Then I use a Mars Black for the underside and feet. I use Mars Black a lot. It's a very opaque black, so generally just one coat of black will completely cover it. Next, I brush a layer of iridescent gold on top of the black. I do 2 layers of the gold here because with just one layer the gold is a little bit streaky. So the second layer just cleans that up a little bit. And the second layer of gold is more of kind of a dry brush application. The dry brushing just really helps to kind of smooth out the streakiness of the first coat. For the little mouse staff, I just do a really light dry brushing of the titanium white on top of the body. And then I dry brush a little bit of this bleached titanium white on the tail. It's just got a hint of yellow and it just helps to separate the tail from the body. And then I dry brush a little bit of the bright gold on top of the mouse. I add a tiny bit of the white, which kind of makes it a yellow gold, which I think just kind of sets the gold on the mouse apart from the gold on the cat. Then all I have to do is sign my signature on the bottom and glue the brass staff in, and this figure is finished. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you liked it or shared it or even left a comment. All that stuff helps YouTube's algorithm get this video out into a wider audience. So until next time, thanks for watching.
Don't panic, don't jump me, don't stop the just rap. Don't panic, don't jump me, don't stop the just rap. Don't panic, don't jump me, don't stop